Please summarize your seminar and highlight your main argument.
So I'm presenting the skeleton overview of a long gestating book that I am co-writing, or mainly they are writing and I am with Stacey Goddard and Paul McDonald, who are both from college. And it is a book about, it's called The Dynamics of Power Politics Towards a Framework of Analysis. The subtitle, we'll see. But the basic idea is that that we study power politics in a lot of different contexts, in a lot of different places, both within the field and outside of the field. So we study it in offices, or we study it in international politics, and that there are people who study international politics from the perspective that only military instruments matter. Other people are all about, no, norms matter and these other things matter, or can be weaponized and used for power political purposes. And our argument is essentially an attempt to bridge that divide and erase it, and say that there is the study of power politics is the study of power politics, and it is relevant wherever we see power politics take place, regardless of who the actors are, the structural context. And we try to supply a language and a way of thinking about power politics that will allow that kind of inclusivity. We think hopefully, not necessarily that we provide advancements, but will help bring together a bunch of ideas that people have and advances people have made under at least a single set of analytic languages.
In the introduction to your book, The Return of Power Politics, you describe your view of world politics as, quote, relational. What makes this viewpoint unique, and what types of relationships most shape the international political landscape?
So a relational approach is not at all unique in the sense that it's a widespread approach to social sciences, philosophy, even natural sciences, that we are applying to the study of power politics. And it's actually been used in the study of power politics before. It's not novel. Essentially, relationalism is a broad body of thought that says, in this context, that the most important place to look for causal dynamics, for explanation, for how the world is put together is not inside the heads of people, like what they're thinking, nor is it in big macro structures like international anarchy, if people are familiar with that term, but it's in the relations between actors or social sites more broadly. So in their transactions, and the content and the structure of those transactions is what drives a lot of outcomes of interest. And so if you have any familiarity with social network analysis, that is a relational approach. Pierre Bourdieu's field theory and practice theory, quote unquote, is a relational approach as well. And they share in common this idea that social causation should be lodged in the in-between, as it were.
Your section on defining power politics states that when actors engage in power politics, they compete over power itself, or at least the instruments of power. Does this limit the scope of what can be considered power politics?
So a big problem that we've had throughout the entire process of first thinking, well, we might want to write this book, and then let's write this book, and now we're writing the book, and will probably happen after we finish the book, is it's really hard to define power politics. And the problem is that all politics implicates power. So it's hard to think, forget politics, all human activity has power political implications or power implications. You don't need to be like a Foucauldian to believe that. You just need to think about how anything that you do in your interaction with others can affect levels of influence. It can affect distribution of resources. It can affect relationships that then facilitate action in the future. And so if that's the case, then where do you draw the line? If we think that power politics can happen in the office or in a family, as we believe that, we agree with that, as well as international politics, how do we know we're looking at power politics? And the best answer we have, which is a little bit in tension with the answer I just gave before, is that power political activity occurs when the participants believe, at least one of the participants believes or acts as if they are engaged in power politics. So you can imagine an interaction with a friend, like you're deciding about where you're going to go out to get a drink. That can be a non-power political act, in fact, probably is. But you can also imagine that somebody might instrumentalize that interaction, might think about it, okay, how can I get them to go to this particular place for the purposes of achieving some end that involves expanding my influence. I want to go there because I want to meet some person. I have ulterior motives. I don't want them to know that. I'm trying to do that to make a connection and to get a job or something. And so that then becomes a power political setting. So there's a process, some scholars talk about a process like this in terms of securitization, the ways in which something can not be seen as a security issue, but then become a security issue. Like, is global warming a security issue? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on whether we treat it that way. I think power politics is kind of the same. And so power politics happens in those contexts, even though on the surface you might be looking at an interaction that looks very similar to one that doesn't involve power politics.
Continuing on this theme, you briefly grapple with the question, what is power? Can you explain the elements that go into this question and why it may not be as straightforward as it first appears?
So whenever we've presented some variant of this argument, we've written some things on this and we've published them. And when we were writing the article in 2016 that became the genesis of this project, everybody is always like, well, how do you define power? And the thing is that, because you think power politics, power has to be in there somewhere. The nice thing for us is that actually that's not the right way to think about power politics at the get-go, because power politics is a compound. So power politics is not power plus politics, it's a specific kind of politics. That's the first thing, I've already suggested that. And so we can be very agnostic about how power works, where it comes from. What's important to note is that in power politics, there are certain kinds of scripts and behaviors in which focus on power in terms of instruments, that is resources. That could be anything, you could talk in very broad terms like culture as a source of power, as a power instrument, or religion, or military capabilities. But you could also get very granular, right? You can think about like a strike fighter aircraft as an instrument used in certain kinds of US force projection. Or you can think about something like the internet as being an instrument used to disseminate disinformation for the purposes of weakening a geopolitical rival. And so in this case, we are thinking about power in this very agentic kind of way that power is something that people maybe possess, although I think we actually back away from that in some degree. But at first glance, that seems to be what we're talking about. And that's true because that's what happens in power politics. Power doesn't necessarily work that way. Power can be different modalities, it can be different places, it can be manifest in relations, all that sort of thing, but that's not our primary interest. Now broadly, we do think that a lot of what happens in power politics is not necessarily a possession of a stock of something, like I have a bunch of tanks, therefore I am powerful. It's actually the performance or the enactment of something like a military attack. And that performance is then a form of power. And this is very similar, if you again, some of your social theory, to the way that Bourdieu talks about embodied capital, that cultural capital isn't just that you own a bunch of nice paintings, it's that you can comport yourself in a particular kind of way that signals that you are competent and capable and the right kind of person to talk to. And if you think about actually a lot of what happens with military's performance is really important. It's important there just as it is in diplomatic instruments, just as it is in sanctions or any other kind of context.
How do the relative power, authority, or efficiency of international organizations or collections of states reflect or contribute to the power, authority, and efficiency of the individual states involved?
One of our basic propositions is that if you think that power politics is just a specific example of politics, that is, it's politics in which there is a deliberate pursuit of power for its own sake, or power for the sake of, or power is being competed over in some way. It's being politicked over, if you will. Then it follows that power politics, like all forms of politics, is primarily about collective action or collective mobilization. Politics, if you think about it, is the art of getting a bunch of people to do things you want to do. And you can do that through threats, through coercion, you can do that through persuasion, through building relationships, friendships, all sorts of different ways that you can try to get people to act collectively. And by the way, oftentimes power politics for the other side in this kind of situation isn't just about getting their own people to act together, it's about undermining your own collective action capacity. So think about like the US Congress, right? What did the two parties do? The Republicans try to get all of their people to vote the same way. The Democrats try to get all their people to vote the same way, but they also try to do things that produce wedges on the other side, that make it harder for them to act collectively, give tough votes that might be politically damaging for somebody at home. So there's this constant jostle of attempts to get collective action for some purpose, some political outcome, and then efforts to undermine or divide or break up that collective action. And that's fundamentally what happens in power politics. And so we think you can take that proposition and you can start thinking about the social network underpinnings of power politics, that a lot of what happens in power politics is about forming ties, alliances, trade agreements, diplomatic exchanges, etc., various kinds of relationships, like you would with a bunch of friends or when you're social networking, and then calling on those relationships when you talk about international politics to do things, like to go invade another country, or to sanction somebody who just invaded another country, or to maybe try to help you out for getting an Olympic site if you're bidding for the Olympics or something like that. And so we try to put that at the forefront. Now, that's relations between states. Of course, the same is true at home. What is the application of military force by a single state? It involves a vast apparatus that is routinized and institutionalized to move people collectively to go out and kill other people in a coordinated way, right? So that's a form of collective action too. It's collective action all the way down. And so once we start thinking about it that way, which is, I think, at some level very banal, because that's what all politics is, that enables us to start really centering the fact that we might look at we have all these subsets of looking at deterrence or looking at sanctions, but fundamentally what's at stake in all of the circumstances is the manipulation, is the deployment of collectively mobilized resources, the threat to deploy collectively mobilized resources, or it is the effort to undermine the cohesion and collective action of other actors.